first officer's expression was grave. The K6 celestial body is 2/3 the size of the moon and weighs 1/10 of it? That's right, that's the one. How long until contact? 10 seconds. In 10 seconds, they will collide with the K6 celestial body. On Olympus, the captain and the first officer immediately brought up the visuals, focusing on the K6 celestial body, their eyes fixed on the holographic projection. Then, they witnessed a scene that shook their very souls. The massive K6 celestial body was slowly moving through the void, and then, in the next second, this not-so-small celestial body suddenly disintegrated in the lifeless space. It was struck at its center, first caving in, then twisted by a force, with all the debris and dust ejected to the rear. The once massive celestial body had a terrifying gash torn right through its center. The impactor faced no obstruction at all and continued to advance at high speed. Fortunately, the opposing force did not launch any attacks on the fleet. They simply ignored them and continued their advance towards the solar system. Back on the Olympus, the captain and the first officer stared in silence at the holographic projection of the K6 celestial body, violently perforated. Would the opposing force stop? The first officer's voice trembled, filled with uncertainty. They should, right? The captain's voice also shook. If they don't stop, they could even penetrate the Earth directly. The first officer's tone became sharp and incredulous. He couldn't even distinguish whether the opposing force was a ship or a weapon. No, it shouldn't be possible. The Earth's mass would cause spatial distortion, perhaps counteracting their curvature. The captain spoke these words, even he had doubts. If the Earth were pierced by them, the molten lava from the Earth's core would erupt, and the dark basalt events that occurred during the Permian, like the Amay Mountain event and the Siberian event, would happen again. No, it could even be worse. This could lead to a supermantle plume event, triggering one of the most severe biological extinctions in history at the end of the Permian. 96% of species on Earth would go extinct. 70% of terrestrial species and 90% of marine species. It would almost send the Earth back to the Cambrian period. Such a terrifying event, even an enhanced version, if it were to occur now, would be unimaginable. But we have no choice but to pray that they really collide with Earth. The first officer's face turned pale, terrifyingly so. He envisioned the scene of lava bursting into the sky, the natural forces buried underground erupting. That would be the end of humanity on Earth. On the flagship of the expedition fleet, the ship didn't even tremble. Peng Hai, astonished, inquired through the sensory network with the intelligence officer if they had just collided with something. Was it a small asteroid? The intelligence officer dismissed it. It was just a small asteroid, nothing to worry about. Then it's fine. Let's head straight for their command center on Saturn. Yes, the intelligence officer responded with some excitement. They had finally arrived. Everyone, clear the way. They were about to charge through. However, perhaps due to their high speed, the entire process was rather dull. There were no spectators to witness their rampage. In such a situation, the lack of cheers was rather anticlimactic. After all, with their speed, by the time the target was destroyed, the enemy hadn't even noticed. It was like when the command center in Saturn's orbit was destroyed by the ship's bow impact. Only after the ship had flown far away did the commanders on the defense positions in the same orbit display expressions of disbelief. They were filled with confusion, wondering what had just happened. How could the command center in Saturn's orbit suddenly be gone? Wait, had they forgotten something? The commander of the defensive position pondered for a moment and suddenly realized, exclaiming in alarm, "Oh no, the generals are still in the command post." The use of generals was quite apt and captured the essence well. However, looking at the command post that was twisted into a mass, the commander couldn't help but feel a pang of worry. The generals were likely in the same predicament as the command post, right? What exactly was that thing heading in this direction? Was it Earth? The commander's expression changed dramatically, and without a moment's hesitation, he immediately ordered, "Quick, move the defensive position back, hide behind Saturn, and do not let yourselves be discovered." Regardless of what that thing was, it had already surpassed their capacity to deal with it. At this moment, their only choice was to back down and hide. They could only pray that the entity was merely heading towards Earth and had no interest in them as mere pawns. Otherwise, with such unpredictable capabilities, they could be buried alongside the generals in an instant. Inside the orbital defense position, the soldiers watched the repeatedly played footage of the command post being destroyed, exchanging glances without questioning the commander's order to defy regulations. Silently, they began to cooperate with the control of the orbital defense position, moving towards the back of Saturn. Disagree? Didn't they see the power of that thing? These soldiers were not concerned about such matters. With such meager pay for a month, and with the government repeatedly deceiving them, making them take the blame, the promised benefits had long lost their credibility due to a certain incident. So why risk their lives? Protecting Earth? Don't be ridiculous. If they were to sacrifice themselves, who would ensure the promised benefits from the government? The first responders from over 100 years ago who rushed in during a certain incident still hadn't seen the promised benefits fulfilled. The government had long left their own heroes disheartened. If these soldiers were to die, it might just be in vain. It was better to hide. After all, the supplies at the base were sufficient. Chapter 3:13. Shoot them all down. In the Avatar world, Earth, Western Pacific, the aerial fleet was stationed just 12 nautical miles off the coast of a certain major country in the east. This distance was extremely close, yet shamelessly did not violate the initial United Nations maritime regulations. Thus, this fleet was practically blocking the doorstep of the eastern nation. Of course, the current eastern nation was utterly helpless against the situation. They could only retract their defenses, abandon the coastline, and retreat into a tight formation, exposing their fangs and spikes to deter any immediate action from the other side. Even if they did act, it would be self-destructive. At exactly 12 nautical miles above the coastline, the Second Fleet's ships were routinely activating and hovering on this line, not a fraction off. The bow of the ship was just skimming the 12 nautical mile mark. The defense module of the ship's cockpit opened, revealing the transparent glass cover above. Captain Stutro of the flagship, the Volado, held a cup of coffee and quietly gazed at the scene before him. Are they still hiding inside like turtles? That's right, Captain. Aside from the skies of the opponent, we have completely blocked their territorial waters and land. The first officer stretched lazily, feeling bored. According to the command center's orders, they come here almost every day to flaunt their power, trying to undermine the opponent. This is the normal thinking of zero-sum games. Nowadays, other countries on Earth have basically had their lifelines controlled by them. After being under their control for about 100 years, they have all become suppliers to the Western world, providing cheap services and dumping goods. Only this Eastern power has managed to hold out without falling. However, those above are becoming impatient. If this continues for a few more years, they will inevitably take action here. Pointless persistence will ultimately crawl beneath our feet. Captain Stutro coldly chuckled twice, shaking his head as he raised his glass high, toasting to the opponent, to their spirit, and also to those who will eventually become history. Just as he put down the coffee cup, suddenly a flash appeared in the distant sky, revealing a dozen black dots. What is that? Black dots in the sky? Is the opponent preparing to break through our blockade? Stutro's expression suddenly froze. Then he revealed a cruel smile. Can't they sit still any longer? I see it too. Zooming in on the target. Hey, is it finally time to act? The first officer also scoffed, clearly disdainful. In their mindset, the ancient often symbolizes decay and backwardness, associated with sorcery and savagery. Now, this ancient country has finally welcomed its sunset. The image has been magnified. It should be the fleet they have built over the years. How is this possible? The first officer's tone was initially full of contempt. He thought that with the opponent's backward technology, their fleet would be weak. However, when he caught a glimpse of the holographic projection, he was utterly shocked and horrified. Because those black dots in the distance turned out to be 16 enormous silver spacecraft. With elongated bodies and mirror-like smooth hulls, they exhibited a rugged yet artistic design. This type of spacecraft was something they had never seen before. And what puzzled the first officer was that the light passing around the spacecraft seemed to show signs of being forced to turn. This phenomenon caused the light to spread, drawing a shining cross in the air, much like unfolding light wings. An unidentified fleet appeared over the distant land, and friend or foe identification had not been completed. The size of the spacecraft has been determined. 3 destroyers and 13 frigates. Alert! The fleet immediately sounded the alarm. Send a message to confirm with the Eastern Power, and activate the fleet's energy shields. The signal has been sent, and we are waiting for a response. Upon discovering such a fleet in the skies of the Eastern Power, Stutro immediately became vigilant and sent a message to confirm with the nearby contact point of the Eastern Power. Meanwhile, at the contact point in the mountains, some distance from the coastline, the guarding soldiers also looked bewildered. Stutro sent a message. Did a fleet just appear above them? What is going on? The other party is about to make a move. Immediately, small vessels were dispatched, flying out of the mountains, and sure enough, a fleet was spotted high in the sky behind the positions. What does this fleet want? Why are they stopping here? Is it our fleet? I don't know. I've already reported to the higher-ups. The higher-ups replied, and they don't know either. Damn, we don't know, and neither does Stutro. Where did they come from? Could they be aliens? Hey, they're moving. At this moment, both sides in a long-standing standoff along the coast of the Eastern Power were puzzled. Since it's not you and not me, then who the heck are they? Who are they? Of course, it's the expedition fleet from the Allied forces of the Parallel Universe's Eastern Power. Peng Hai, who had crashed all the way here, felt a surge of anger after hearing the intercepted intelligence from his aide, especially upon seeing the flagship fleet of the Old Alliance at the 12 nautical mile line. He couldn't help but sneer. In this universe, you all called for help, but now you come here to turn the tables in a parallel universe, right? Prepare the shockwave missile. Give them a taste. Yes, one shockwave missile is ready. Side turret number 2. Launch. The fleet, high above the continent, temporarily ignored the communications initiated by the two sides and instead opened their sails. Soon, a missile, shining with pure white light, flew out from the ship. The other party initiated an attack. The Stutro fleet, confused about the situation, suddenly understood at that moment. The missile has been launched. It must be the enemy. Counterattack. However, just as the captain shouted for a counterattack, that strange missile was already charging toward their ship. So fast, Stutro's pupils shrank sharply. This missile was unexpectedly quick. Moreover, what made his pupils shrink further was that the shining white warhead actually passed through the energy shield they had set up, as if it were nothing. No, it wasn't as if it were nothing. The white light surrounding the missile grew even brighter. Boom. Then a violent collision sound erupted. Stutro lost consciousness. The upgraded shockwave missile instantly penetrated the entire Villarado ship, from bow to stern. The spiraled and twisted space was also contorted into a helix. A ship like this, positioned here, could force the Eastern Power to abandon its coastal vessels, and in just a moment, it was completely destroyed. Explosion, flames, and the thunderous sound of crashing into the water. Humph, To die so easily, it really is too cheap for them. On the flagship of the expedition fleet, Pang Hai's voice was tinged with suppressed anger. Although the eastern power of the earth was not his ally now, he had come, they had come. And soon they would be allies. Allies can't be bullied like this. Dong Liang, hold the shockwave missile in place. And shoot a few more to thoroughly clean up the area. There are plenty of pests around this place. This statement was filled with a biting tone, accompanied by a murderous intent. Understood. Please provide the full text. All the foundations of the base are destroyed. Chapter 314. Conquest. The sky was very calm. Only a pure white streak of light quietly passing through the sky. It was serene and silent, from a distance. People on the ground might think it was a shooting star in the heavens. However, this was truly the scythe of death. It was here to reap lives. Hey, there's a shooting star in the sky. On the plains of Siberia, soldiers of the Northern Alliance stood on the watchtower, watching the flash streaking across the sky. Their expressions somewhat peculiar. It had been a long time since a meteor had broken through the atmosphere, since the orbital planetary defense system had been established after clearing the low Earth orbit. How rare. Indeed, it's quite rare, and it's a white shooting star. One soldier's companion was also in a good mood, so he spoke up. I heard that the orbital planetary defense system has tens of thousands of attack satellites. Tens of thousands. The soldier's eyes widened, and he said dreamily, if they all fell at once, it would definitely be spectacular. What are you saying? Unexpectedly, the moment these words were spoken, his companion turned pale with fright and quickly made a shushing gesture. Don't speak recklessly here. His companion was so anxious that he nearly covered the other's mouth. Okay. I understand. The soldier quickly nodded, but he kept his head tilted back, gazing at the sky, watching quietly. As a result, he hadn't finished speaking when he was stunned by the scene before him. Staring at the sky, his eyes widened, pupils shaking, jaw dropping. He reached out and pulled his companion in shock. What's wrong? The watch here is strict. Don't talk recklessly. No. Quickly, look at the sky. Huh? The sky? His companion frowned and turned his head to look up again. Instantly, he was also dumbfounded, because at that moment in the sky, following the white shooting star, were countless meteors. No, those weren't meteors. They were launched spacecraft. There were so many that the two of them couldn't count them. Just a rough estimate showed there were thousands. What is that? Are they planetary defense satellites? They're planetary defense satellites being shot down. Someone is launching an attack. No, that leading white shooting star. Why is it getting bigger? What? At this moment, the soldier and his companion finally sensed something was wrong. The satellites they had observed earlier seemed to be heading straight towards them. Oh no, run, we can't escape, it's too fast. A point of incandescent light arrived in an instant. Boom. The explosion echoed through the clouds. The solid fortress standing in Siberia was instantly engulfed in a dust cloud nearly 100 meters high. The original storage facilities of the base began to explode in a chain reaction, the intense flames turning the place into a hell on earth. In an instant, nearly 1,000 people in the entire base lost their lives, perishing in the explosions and flames. Whoosh. The culprit, however, turned a corner underground and ascended again to attack the next base. As for the sky, a rain of satellites began to fall, a truly spectacular sight, resembling a burst of fireworks against the blue backdrop. For a long time, the dazzling satellite rain continued to pour down. At that moment, humanity on Earth seemed to witness the end of days. The sky was filled with shooting stars, and bursts of fire erupted endlessly. In orbit, a type of advanced missile was darting back and forth at high speed, distorting the space around it, turning any spacecraft in its path into debris, captured by gravity and falling to the Earth. What about the defense fleet of the Space Forces? A series of attacks came like skewers, piercing through everything. The near-Earth spaceport? Considering its large size, the missile unleashed a deadly barrage that left no room for defense. The short-range strikes provided the spaceport a moment to respond. High-energy weapons were activated, but to no avail. They couldn't inflict any damage. Laser cannons were also tried, but the surface was protected by a shell that proved unbreakable. Oh no! The sixth compartment has been breached. The plasma beams were useless as well. It was over. They were doomed. With its tearing shield, the missile continued its high-speed maneuvers. All weapons at the spaceport, whether high-energy or plasma beams, were twisted away upon impact, flung into the void. Every attack seemed ineffective against this small missile. The soldiers at the spaceport fell into despair. They had exhausted all their weapons, unable even to breach the missile's defenses. They could only watch helplessly as their fate unfolded before them, witnessing the destruction of their spaceport piece by piece. In a corner of Zone 9 of the spaceport, a soldier on the defensive position watched in anger as his comrades' signals were interrupted one after another. With blood-red eyes, he dashed toward the orbital defense laser cannon in a frenzy. Skillfully operating the cannon, he aimed at the missile passing by and pressed the activation button with desperation. Continuous high-energy lasers shot out. At this power, a ship without an energy shield could be pierced instantly. However, it faced the missile, and the continuous lasers merely flowed over its dark surface as if it were water. The missile, like a boat on water, sustained no damage at all. Not only was it unharmed, but it also deftly turned and locked onto the soldier based on the direction of the attack. The rounded warhead now pointed directly at him. The soldier was utterly despaired, thinking, what on earth is this thing? None of their attacks worked, absolutely none. With a thunderous sound, the missile charged forward. And with a final explosion, the spaceport was destroyed. The base of the Eastern Power, along with its foundation, was obliterated. The Pacific Fleet stationed in the region, annihilated. The Second Fleet, annihilated. The Near-Earth Orbital Planetary Defense System, annihilated. The Near-Earth Orbital Fleet, annihilated. The Lunar Orbital Defense Fleet, annihilated. The Extraterrestrial Spaceport, annihilated. The Global Space Military Command, annihilated. At this point, all organized armed forces from non-Eastern powers within the Earth's lunar orbit have been completely eradicated. To achieve this, the flagship of the expedition fleet only fired 2 fully operational spatial shock bombs. And as for these shock bombs, all I can say is that they brought along slightly more than 100 million when leaving Pandora. Yet, they were all unnecessary. This series of annihilations is the best proof of the power of the spatial shock bombs. Before the shock bombs, those unable to conform to spatial order were mere ants. Chapter 315, Floating City? In the Avatar world, above the continent, at the Space Military Command Center. At this moment, the atmosphere in the conference room is terrifyingly tense. In the center, the holographic projection shows the fleet and base signal connections throughout the Earth-Mars orbit. Just half an hour ago, they were in a routine meeting, when the sudden disconnection of the Stutro signal from the Second Fleet caught their full attention. However, mere attention was not enough. The subsequent half hour almost gave these people heart attacks. All 7 bases in Siberia lost contact. All 4 bases in the region lost contact. All 6 bases from the neighboring power lost contact. All 5 bases from another nation lost contact. The spaceport and fleet also lost contact. The CIA agents standing before the generals in the office were turning pale. This series of disconnections, just thinking about the possible reasons behind it made their legs tremble. Bang! The leading general slammed the table, shouting angrily at him. What the hell caused the disconnections? As he roared, he pointed at the holographic projection, where all bases and fleets were displayed in red, and he couldn't help but feel deep fear. Destroyed, all destroyed. The CIA intelligence officer swallowed hard and stammered, a bit frightened, explaining, a fleet suddenly appeared over the Eastern Power. The only source we could trace is from there. A suddenly appearing fleet? All destroyed. And it's only been half an hour. The general was also shocked. He simply couldn't imagine where this fleet had come from. This power was truly terrifying. What are we going to do? In just half an hour, they wiped out all the sky forces near Earth. Are they extraterrestrials? What should we do? Damn it. We just watched them be so arrogant. That's right. We need to retaliate. In the discussions within the conference room, the atmosphere of fear was unanimous. But the last 2 remarks suddenly made the atmosphere turn eerie. Retaliate? We can't let them be this arrogant. In this situation, how could any sane person say such a thing? The generals shifted their gaze to the 2 speakers, exchanging glances. Oh, it's them. Then there's nothing to worry about. They are the ones who can say this. These 2 individuals, did not enter the Sky Army through regular channels, but rather were pushed in due to their skin color and the vague categorization of gender. They lack any common sense and only know how to draw attention by going against the tide. Generals, what is there to fear? We should reorganize the fleet within the solar system and eliminate these arrogant individuals. Seeing everyone fall silent, one of the 2 spoke up in a sharp and arrogant tone. The voice resembled that of a character from an ancient costume drama. Well, not just the voice. Their physical appearance was quite similar, though they needed a few more components. The general with the large head didn't want to pay them any mind. Reorganize the fleet within the solar system? Why? To stand in line and wait for death? Moreover, according to intelligence, the fleet and command post in Mars orbit had already been destroyed 45 minutes ago. Our general felt a deep sense of helplessness. Sometimes, however, helplessness is unavoidable. Boom. Just as the conference room fell silent again, a sound of the ceiling cracking echoed, and blinding sunlight spilled into the room. The ceiling was breached? That wasn't the main issue. The important thing was that a long, dark projectile was suspended in midair. What is this? Are they attacking us? Run, quick, run. The scene immediately descended into chaos. Many members in the conference room rushed to squeeze out through the main door. This was the logical response. Who cares what it is? Just run first. Of course, there were also those who were less than normal, like the 2 so-called correct individuals. Why run? It's a dummy missile, a dummy. What on earth is this thing? In an instant, nearly everyone in the conference room had fled, leaving just the 2 hiding at the door, proudly gazing at the missile above. Why would the other side put themselves in danger? Actually, it wasn't really danger. They only stayed in place for less than a second, striking a proud standing pose. There were considerable benefits to doing this. In future elections, hey, they fled. And I was the last to run. Doesn't that make me seem more impressive? You want to vote for me? Of course, this line of thought wasn't wrong. However, the operator controlling the shockwave missile rolled his eyes at the sight of the 2 individuals in the office who hardly resembled humans and decisively pressed the impact button. In that brief moment of less than a second, the shockwave missile was reactivated. In the terrified gaze of the 2, it directly struck. Only a twisted mass of flesh remained, and the world instantly quieted down. Europe, a significant member country of the Northern Alliance, gathered here. In the age of interstellar travel, there was even a massive floating city above Europe. This floating city was able to hover because it used superconductive or mind from another world as its foundation. And a vast electromagnetic field covered the ground. The endless power from controllable nuclear fusion would ensure that this city would never touch the ground. Therefore, this city is also known as the City of Eternal Glory. The inhabitants of this floating city are renowned individuals both socially and internationally. The floating city is now a source of pride for the prosperity of the region. Even a beggar sleeping on the streets in member countries of the Northern Alliance will proudly hold their head high when mentioning this floating city. It symbolizes their ultimate prosperity, pride, and brilliance. Since its construction, it has quietly floated in the air for over a decade, enjoying the admiration and reverence from people. Everyone takes pride in being able to visit this floating island. It is said that the combined wealth of the residents on this island accounts for 70 of the entire Northern Alliance. In fact, it even constitutes 70 of the world's wealth. This is no exaggeration, as even some individuals from other regions choose to reside there for extended periods. It seems that being able to access the island has become a symbol of status, due to the presence of many important figures living on the island. The security around it is among the best in the world. There are not only fleets, but several airborne divisions stationed nearby as well. Additionally, on the ground, there are hundreds of coastal defense weapons. These coastal defense weapons, referred to as high-energy cannons, are heavy weaponry capable of shooting down ships in orbit. There are hundreds of such weapons around the island. Such firepower configuration is quite telling. A 5-star general from the Airborne Division once stated, even the opposing forces of the space military would never break through the defenses of the floating city. Just then, this 5-star general was making coffee when suddenly, meteors began to streak across the sky. Chapter 316. Clean up and prepare to meet meteors appeared in the sky. And not just one, but a meteor shower. No, it wasn't a meteor shower, it was a rain of satellites. The coffee spoon in his hand was abruptly dropped, and the general's expression changed drastically. Where the heck are these meteors coming from around the Earth? There are only satellites, those densely packed defense satellites. Give me the floating city defense team on high alert, keep a close watch, and call the space military to find out what is happening. The general hurriedly left the room, summoning soldiers. Such a large-scale satellite fall, this is right at our doorstep. Why hasn't there been any news? The soldiers outside the room immediately reacted and prepared to notify the command center. However, the communication channel only emitted a harsh buzzing sound. General, there is no response from communications. Is it being jammed? No, I've already ordered the floating city defense team. Communications are normal. It's just that the space military isn't responding. None of the 9 channels are answering. The soldier kept twisting the buttons when suddenly he thought of a possibility. And his voice trembled. It wasn't just him, the general also realized. If the signal isn't being jammed, then there's only one possibility. The space military has been attacked and wiped out? How is that possible? That's the space military. They can't be wiped out. The general couldn't believe it. In terms of strength, the space force in that region is undoubtedly the most powerful on Earth. How could it possibly be wiped out silently? Just at that moment of shock for the 2 individuals, a white-hot meteor in the sky suddenly descended, charging towards them. This meteor was unlike any other. Surrounded by a faint yet intense halo of light, flames and light flowed around it like water, leaving no trace behind, cold and lifeless. The key was, as it drew closer, the unabashed high-energy fluctuations immediately caught the attention of the floating island's defensive forces. After warnings proved ineffective, they prepared to retaliate against the invader. Anti-aircraft weapons, ineffective. High-energy lasers, ineffective. High-energy cannons, hit but also ineffective. Damn, what on earth is this? The shell of the shockwave projectile acted as a barrier. Civilizations unable to manipulate spatial technology were utterly helpless against it, easily crushed. In the sky, the floating island, which had stood firm for over a decade, was pierced directly by the shockwave projectile with a whoosh. Boom. The floating island began to tremble violently. On the island, wealthy capitalists, politicians, and their mistresses sprang to their feet in shock. What is happening? An earthquake? How could a floating island experience an earthquake? What is going on outside? Boom. Another intense tremor shook the island. The people on the island finally lost their composure and began to panic. They screamed and scrambled out of their mansions, trying to find planes to escape. But how could that be possible? Targets locked by the shockwave projectile had no chance to escape. The inhabitants of this island controlled 70% of the world's wealth. And today, this 70% would be rendered completely ownerless. A single shockwave projectile could shatter the global economy. Below the island, a circle of cities surrounded it. Thanks to the fame brought by the floating island, tourism in the city was thriving. Many people came from all over the world just to admire this city that never falls. Even now, there were still millions of tourists in the city. They gathered beneath the floating island or in famous areas of the city. Suddenly, gunfire erupted, throwing them into a panic. The sudden tremors of the floating island further changed their expressions. Although they admired the floating island, they were not fools. They knew if the floating island fell, they would be in serious trouble. Run, run. The floating island is going to fall. Crash. Just at the moment the screams rang out, a louder roar echoed through the sky. In the shocked gazes of millions, the city, which claimed to never fall, began to disintegrate in the air. Indeed, this floating city is as it claims, and even in such collisions, the physical properties of the superconducting ore itself will not change, it will still float. However, not falling does not mean it won't disintegrate. The floating city began to crumble piece by piece under the terrified gazes of millions. The building materials on the ground were not made of superconducting ore. The fragments of the disintegrating city, along with the once mighty tycoons and politicians, plummeted toward the ground. Throughout the process, the shockwave acted like a precise hunter, gradually dismantling the floating city, causing it to fall apart. Finally, after completing the disassembly, it dove headfirst toward the electromagnetic devices below. Boom, 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 boom. Below the floating city, there were 4 fusion power generators in the massive electromagnetic installation. With 4 explosions, the electromagnetic devices instantly lost power and were forcibly shut down. A strange buzzing sound echoed throughout the city. The city that stood in the sky was reduced to countless fragments, but it still remained a majestic sight. Eventually, unable to bear the weight, it crashed down toward the ground with a fierce wind. Boom. A violent collision sound, accompanied by shockwaves, swept through the area. Dust rose nearly 1,000 meters. The deafening roar, explosions, and screams echoed as the fragments of the floating city fell, creating a massive pit in the ground, causing the earth to crack open, skyscrapers to topple, and dust to obscure the sky. At that moment, beneath the floating city, it was like hell on earth. This city, suspended in the sky, finally met its end. The city that would not fall ultimately collapsed and disintegrated. On that day, the sky fell. On the flagship of the expedition fleet, Pang Hai detached from the sensory link and stood quietly on the bridge, overlooking the dense forest in the distance. Captain, we have received news from Europe. The floating city and the surrounding armed forces have been completely eliminated, reported the intelligence officer casually. Analyzing, the floating city was too fragile. Fortunately, we controlled the power, avoiding the collapse of most of the city area. Pang Hai did not turn around, merely nodding slightly in agreement. Controlling the power was the right choice. The lives of those in the city are of little consequence, but we should minimize casualties for those below. We are here to retrieve, not to engage in slaughter. Disarming the opposing forces was also a response to their ignorance, daring to provoke us. Haha, indeed, the intelligence officer nodded in agreement. With the opposing armed forces disarmed, their objective had been accomplished. Next, there would still be places where they could be useful. What? How could they still be useful? Of course, for constructing the transport fleet. There are so many people on Earth who can serve as labor. Anyway, they just need to provide manpower. Let them work hard in the factories and build spaceships vigorously. All right, the matter is settled. Let's prepare to meet our new acquaintances. Pang Hai adjusted his collar, standing tall and straight. With the armed forces on Earth disarmed, it was time to meet with the great power in the east of the world. Through the captured intelligence, he has learned that the people of the great Eastern nation in this world have not lost their dignity and truly deserve the title of comrades. Nearly a century of perseverance and hard work has instilled in the hearts of the people of this Eastern nation a fighting spirit and an uplifting morale that rivals even the most determined. Some among them are the staunchest warriors. They are resolute fighters who can be relied upon directly. And now, they have arrived. And the opposing side no longer needs to hold their ground for so many years. Moreover, Pang Hai knows that the opposing side will not reject their invitation. After all, who would willingly remain in a world that does not belong to them when they could lead a good life? Send the message, prepare to disembark. Chapter 317. Contact in the Avatar world. The warriors at the observation post are now quite confused. Today, Stutro has come to provoke them as usual. They have been in a standoff for several years and are already used to it. However, what is strange is that, besides Stutro's fleet, another fleet has appeared in the sky. The key point is that this fleet is neither from Stutro's side nor from theirs. The Sentinels are puzzled. And Stutro even asks whose fleet it is. If it's not theirs, is it still theirs? With this fleet, how can they still be trapped by you? As they are grumbling, they witness a shocking scene. The mysterious fleet in the sky simply launches something resembling a missile. That object flies towards the location where Stutro usually patrols, and then, a colleague with an optical telescope gasps in surprise. Because the missile-like object fired by the opposing side unexpectedly executes a simultaneous strike, taking down Stutro's entire fleet. Not only that, but the fleet also fired another shot, which headed towards the sky. Then, they witnessed a meteor shower that they would never forget in their lifetime. Even more astonishingly, after doing all this, the fleet that had instilled fear in them actually sent them a message. The information is confidential. I will transcribe it for headquarters. The Sentinels quickly reacted and urgently transmitted the information to headquarters. They are not foolish. Since the opposing side did not attack them but instead targeted Stutro, it indicates that, at least for now, they harbor no ill will towards them. In that case, this information must be transmitted as quickly as possible. Of course, while sending the information, they also truthfully included the details of the events as an attachment. In the distance, outside an underground base in the interior of the great Eastern nation, Chun Lao and a group of people watched the meteor shower still falling from the sky, remaining silent for a long time. Chun Lao. The Space Force personnel confirmed that these are the Western planetary defense satellites and sky facilities falling down. Beside Chun Lao, an elderly man was smiling and said, "In the opposing fleet and spaceport, I wonder what kind of trouble they have stirred up to provoke such retaliation." Still smiling, Chun Lao frowned and looked at the sky, glancing at the old man, but his tone did not agree with him. He said seriously, "This is bad. The other side is aiming to eliminate the armed forces in Earth's skies. Could it be that those fools have attracted extraterrestrials? Regardless, we are all humans. If aliens attack, will they waste time distinguishing between the various factions of humanity? Humph." With a cold snort, he continued, clearly worried. At that point, they might just wipe us out too. The old man beside him fell into deep thought immediately. We must send a letter to the relevant authorities and find out what they are really up to. The tone of the elder was more serious than ever. He spoke the truth. If it really was a colonial fleet from the West that had provoked some advanced extraterrestrial civilization, once they arrived on Earth, would they care whether it was a Western power or an Eastern one? As long as they confirmed it was humanity, they would just eliminate them. Sigh. What a mess they caused. The old man realized this and was so furious that he gritted his teeth, striding out in a huff. What is going on at such a critical moment? After he left, the elder let out a heavy sigh. The satellite rain continued to pour down, and the more intense it became, the more alarmed he felt. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of hurried footsteps approached, and the old man who had just rushed out suddenly came back at an even faster pace. Elder Chun, urgent report from the coastal observation post. Let me see. Upon hearing it was an urgent report from the coast, Elder Chun immediately took it over and began to scan through it. Just as he finished reading the events, his pupils suddenly contracted. It turned out that the source of the satellite rain, which had disarmed all of Earth's armed forces, was actually here. Moreover, the other side had even sent them a message. Who exactly were they? Taking a deep breath, Elder Chun ultimately opened the confidential letter sent by them and began to read its contents. However, upon reading the first sentence, the over 70-year-old Elder Chun nearly exclaimed in shock, because the opening greeting of the letter was written like this: to the Eastern Power of Earth in the Parallel Universe. Parallel Universe, Eastern Power? Elder Chun suddenly looked up, his eyes filled with disbelief. Were they here to help them? Was that the commotion they had just caused? After seriously reading through the entire content of the letter, the shock in Elder Chun's heart lingered for a long time. He never expected it to be like this. That fleet actually claimed to be the Eastern Power from a parallel universe. They had come not only to help, but also to take them away. They straightforwardly stated their origins and mentioned that they were entering an interstellar era, lacking in population. Disarming Earth's armed forces was part of their mission. They were here for conquest. However, this was just one side of the story from the letter, and Elder Chun still felt doubtful, not ready to believe it recklessly. However, since the other party has shown goodwill, it is unwise to turn down a friendly gesture. Old Chin quickly retracted his previous report and immediately ordered, I will dictate this. And you urgently report it to the observation station, asking them to send a message to the other side. After speaking, he hurried to the communication room. This matter was too significant. As for its authenticity, Old Chun had only one question, despite the doubts. Why would the other party go so far as to deceive them if it were not true? To deceive them? To bring down tens of thousands of satellites and fleets from the sky, as if they were fireworks, just to fool them? How could that be possible? Old Chun thought. Given their current situation, was it worth the other party's effort to deceive them? If there were real intentions, wouldn't it be easier to threaten them directly? The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. This might really be true. As he walked, at the entrance of the communication room, where others were keeping their distance, he quietly took out a document from his pocket. This was the information that had been sent back from the homeland at a great cost, even at the cost of lives. Sigh. He didn't say anything. Just tightened his grip on the document and let out a heavy sigh. They had sacrificed themselves before dawn. He wondered if they had seen today as satellite rain. After a few seconds of silence, Old Chin put away the document and returned to his usual demeanor. The situation was urgent, and there was no time for sadness. He had long been accustomed to burying such emotions deep within. A flicker of determination crossed his eyes, and then his expression turned neutral as he reached for the door of the communication room. Opening this door, perhaps a new world, a new life awaited them. Chapter 318. Suspended in the sky in a major eastern nation, in the southwest region, at the huge square in front of the Spacecraft Design Research Institute. Old Chun and others waited eagerly. After some communication, Pang Hai explained his background to them and arranged to meet here. Is it coming? Is it coming? It's coming soon. The personnel at the outpost are seeing the spacecraft slowly flying this way. What kind of spacecraft? According to Old Chun, it was coming from the southern gate and had only taken 2 years. 2 years, faster than light, with curvature jumps. My goodness. In front of the research institute, a group of scientists suppressed their excitement, carefully discussing among themselves. Especially after hearing that it was a faster-than-light spacecraft, their eyes lit up, straining to look towards the horizon. Old Chin stood alone at the front, quietly waiting. And what about the expedition fleet? Pang Hai was commanding the fleet, heading towards the agreed location. However, along the way, he couldn't help but feel uneasy seeing large-scale civil defense projects built at intervals in the mainland. Civil defense projects, it seemed every city had them. And this scale was already at a level to prevent nuclear war. This was a necessary measure. The intelligence officer's expression was also complex, but he consoled himself, saying, at least we are here, and everything will be resolved. Yes, let us head to the target location at full speed. Also, let us prepare to start the plan. Understood. In the sky, 16 spacecraft separated into 4, slowly ascending into Earth's orbit, parting ways with the main fleet. After half an hour of continued travel, the fleet arrived at the square in front of the Research Institute's entrance. Below, watching the fleet in space, faintly illuminated by sunlight, a wave of gasps arose. The strength of these spacecraft was unknown to the scientists for now, but their aesthetic appeal was undeniable. There was a beauty that conformed to the principles of science and fluid dynamics. The fluid dynamics aspect stemmed from their ability to re-enter the atmosphere, marking them as true amphibious assault vessels for air and space. It was worth it, truly worth it. Below, scholars studying near light-speed hulls had tears streaming down their faces. Just seeing the spacecraft's exterior and its mirror-like shell made them feel it was worth a lifetime. That won't do. You must continue researching the spacecraft for us. Noticing the meaning in the eyes of the scholar beside him, Elder Chen quietly supported the trembling hand of the scholar. Come on, we should go meet our counterparts from the other world. Elder Chen took a deep breath, suppressing his excitement, and stepped forward first. On the other side, the flagship of the fleet also descended slowly. This time, only the flagship was landing. After all, the square was not large enough to accommodate all 12 warships. A strong wind swept through as the spacecraft shut down its shields and deployed its landing gear, coming to a steady stop in the center of the square. Then, a crisp clicking sound was heard as the hatch of the spacecraft opened, and the gangway extended officially. Elder Chun and others, leaning against the shuttle, had reached the bottom of the gangway. At this moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on the dark, unclear hatch at the top of the gangway. Although Elder Chen appeared calm on the surface, his hand gripping the edge of his clothing betrayed his tension. He was afraid that strange creatures with 2 heads, 3 eyes, and 4 hands would emerge from the hatch. If such beings claimed to be from a parallel universe's eastern superpower, while he might understand, he was certain he wouldn't be able to hold it together. Then, Pang Hai walked out of the hatch, standing tall and composed. Upon seeing Pang Hai, Elder Chen's brow shot up. Good news. It was humanoid. Bad news. Aside from the head and limbs, the black shell growing on its body made it look anything but human. Elder Chen thought, is this really a bizarre version of the eastern superpower from a parallel universe? Pang Hai, accompanied by the deputy captain, slowly walked down the gangway and approached the astonished crowd. Welcome. Hello. Pang Hai greeted warmly. Elder Chen suppressed his unusual emotions, smiled slightly, and extended his hand in a friendly manner, saying, you must be Captain Pang Hai, and you must be Mr. Chen, do you mean? Elder Chen. Pang Hai replied, shaking hands with him without any airs of a savior. Of course, Elder Chen masked his unusual gaze well, and Pang Hai did not notice. However, Elder Chen, being an old hand, hit it effectively, but the scientists around him were less discreet with their stares. Looking at the strange expression on the other person's face, Pang Hai lowered his head and immediately realized, grinning as he introduced, this is biotechnology, capable of providing internal pressure and gas conversion in the universe. When stripped away, we are just normal humans. Ha ha ha, so that's it, it's biotechnology. With Pang Hai's explanation, the strange look in the scientist's eyes quickly transformed into a terrifying curiosity. Consequently, he became even more enthusiastic towards Pang Hai, while Pang Hai was discussing matters with Elder Chun on the other side. 4 warships that had been dispatched had already entered Earth's orbit and, after re-entering in 15 minutes, were now positioned directly above the capital city. Although the 4 warships did not cover the sky completely, their imposing presence was enough to suffocate the entire city's inhabitants. The politicians in the city were already panicking due to the situation. After inquiring with the space military, their anxiety only deepened. It turned out that the space military confirmed that all spacecraft fleets within the lunar orbit had been destroyed. And the only explanation for the appearance of more than 2 escort-class ships was that they were invaders. This meant that the invaders were now hovering directly above them. How could this not be suffocating? Moreover, these 4 warships were not just sitting there. From the moment they appeared, they issued a no-fly warning to the entire continent. A complete no-fly zone, with violators being shot down immediately. Those who understood the current situation acted decisively, but those who didn't took it lightly. However, the warships issuing the warning would not actually show leniency. This was a state of war. Anyone who violated the orders would be met with a pale ray. Under the pale ray, any biological entity would instantly disintegrate into white mist. Subsequently, the flying objects would fall, crashing onto the streets. As a result, a thick layer of white mist enveloped the skies over the continent. In just half an hour, the entire continent was filled with terror. Those hiding on the ground were in a state of panic and despair. What was that in the sky? Enemies, enemies. Our entire space military has been destroyed. Oh my god, what should we do? All flying objects have been shot down. We are finished. We are finished. Quick, run, run. Where the hell can we escape to? On the ground, the crowds were terrified and at a loss, fearing that a single ray of white light from the ships above could harvest their lives in droves. But how could they escape? Any device that left the ground more than 5 meters would be shot down. In this era of flying cars, how could they run without them? It's over, all over. Meanwhile, high above, the 4 ships remained motionless, completely indifferent to the chaos and fear below. Their only responsibility was to stay there, and how to deal with these people depended entirely on how Pang Hai's negotiations were progressing. Their fate is no longer in their own hands. Chapter 319, back to the prehistoric era. In the world of avatars, the expedition fleet resolved all battles within an hour of arriving on Earth. The 6 orbital fleets of the Northern Alliance, spaceports, and all planetary defense satellites were destroyed. Now, the opposing force was like a toothless dog, with its head lowered, not daring to bark, only able to cover its head and whimper. In the conference room of a research institute in a major Eastern nation, Elder Chen took a deep breath, suppressing the shock in his heart. His worldview had completely been reshaped. It was like being shattered and then pieced back together by Pang Hai. So, you have a parallel universe where a biochemical virus erupted on Earth, and all countries except for your nation have disappeared? Now, another parallel universe has moved in where your country is, but the total population is only 2.8 billion, so you need more people. Elder Chen took a deep breath, his eyebrows suddenly raising. What a coincidence. Encountering a world with an apocalyptic crisis, managing to rescue people from his nation, and now another world conveniently has space available? How could he not think more about this coincidence? Could it be your doing? That was the general idea. Peng Hai grinned, quietly waiting for the elderly man in front of him. Elder Chen didn't immediately accept with joy. Instead, he frowned and carefully considered the pros and cons of the situation. Holding his hands together, he sank into deep thought. The old man and the scientist beside him opened their mouths, stretched their necks, ready to speak, but ultimately decided against it. This decision was significant and could not be made by him alone. Exhaling, Elder Chen revealed a smile and said to Peng Hai, however, I mean to agree, but we still need to discuss the final outcome back home. Of course, came the response, which was within Peng Hai's expectations. After a smile, he suddenly remembered, by the way, Elder Chen, our main goal is to take you away. What should we do with the remaining forces on this earth? How to deal with them? Elder Chen narrowed his eyes, fully aware that Peng Hai was referring to the Northern Alliance. His fists clenched slightly as he felt the document in his arms. Suddenly, he smiled kindly and said, it's not feasible to wipe them out completely. Since they enjoy technical blockades and racial segregation suppression, why not return the favor in kind? This earth has suffered at their hands, not just us. Oh, Peng Hai was quite curious about Elder Chen's plan, raising an eyebrow and leaning in, waiting for his next words. Some minor tactics are nothing to worry about. In response, Elder Chen simply smiled modestly. However, the hidden sharpness in his eyes told Peng Hai that this seemingly kind old man, akin to a grandfather, was far from simple. Beneath that kindness lay decades of repressed sorrow, and what would come from it would be a steel-like resolve. Elder Chen's plan was straightforward. On the current Earth in the Avatar world, it wasn't just the Eastern nation that was being suppressed. For example, camels, South America, and Africa were also suppressed by the Northern Alliance just like 100 years ago. Therefore, Elder Chen is preparing to turn the tables and disarm the entire Western coalition, pushing them back to a prehistoric era. If it were just that, with enough talent, the opposing side might take a few decades to regain some of humanity's former glory. So here, a second force must be introduced, which is the ethnic groups that have been suppressed by them all along. Hey, keep their technology in the information age. There's no need to do anything else. Just focus on these 2 points, and those countries and ethnicities that have been oppressed will know what they should do. What should they do? Of course, seek revenge for grievances and express their complaints. Moreover, once they gain power, they will strike with utmost severity. After hearing Elder Chen's plan, Peng Hai subconsciously gave a thumbs up. Harsh, very harsh. It would make those Western forces rethink their positions. They are not being excessive. They are merely replicating what the others have done in the past, right? If you were kind to others before, wouldn't that mean nothing happens? Laughs. Elder Chen's plan is feasible, but we can add a supplement. The deputy captain, resting his chin on his hand, nodded and then added, we don't want to see others in space later, so let us set up an artificial intelligence blockade around Earth, and let them fight among themselves. Elder Chen's eyes lit up. Great, it turns out there are such talents on the opposing fleet. Since you brought it up, I want to be polite. He immediately agreed. That is also possible, but relying solely on artificial intelligence is not safe. Let us leave a few unmanned vessels in orbit. From now on, the opposing side should not think about entering space. Alright, let us go with this plan. After all, we need to build many spaceships, which is completely feasible. The plan was thus finalized at the meeting. Elder Chen and Peng Hai shook hands with smiles on their faces. They were enjoying their conversation, and Elder Chen was eager for the opposing side to implement this plan immediately. However, that was not possible right away. For now, the population of the Northern Alliance still needs to do hard labor to build the spaceships. We cannot directly push them back to a prehistoric era. After Peng Hai returned to the ship to organize matters, only Elder Chen remained in the meeting room. He chewed on his words and silently shook his head, murmuring, what a pity. What is the pity, Elder Chen? A nearby elder, organizing documents, looked over curiously. What is there to be sorry about? This is like a pie falling from the sky, a tremendous blessing. Not that, but the idea of pushing them back to prehistoric times. Elder Chen waved his hand, chuckling. I was just thinking, if technology returns to prehistoric times, how can the environment still be the same as now? Where are the large animals in this region? They wouldn't pose any challenge at all. So, you want to add some saber-toothed tigers and large mammals there to give them a full experience of the prehistoric era? The old man raised an eyebrow. What large mammals? That is not challenging enough. If we're adding anything, it should be dinosaurs. They're big, fierce, and truly prehistoric. The old man could already picture the scene of the politicians from that certain country being chased by a certain dinosaur. He exchanged a glance with Chun, and they both smiled knowingly. That is a great idea. The old man gave a thumbs up. He could already visualize it in his mind. But isn't this prehistoric era a bit too prehistoric? However, it sounds interesting. I'll have the scientists check if they have the technology for this. The old man chuckled. The Northern Alliance. Alright, so this is how we're playing it. Huh, we like dinosaurs, but we're not interested in experiencing the prehistoric era alongside them. Chapter 320. Are we serious? The tone for this side of the Avatar Earth has been set. Next, the question is how to execute it. As for whether the Eastern major power on Earth would relocate, after careful, detailed, and serious discussions, they directly chose to agree. Of course, how could they disagree? It's like a sudden appearance of a group of aliens guaranteeing you an 8-hour workday, weekends off, regular holidays, and still getting paid, with no cost involved. Just needing to follow them. You can honestly say you wouldn't be tempted? Moreover, the key is that they aren't aliens. They are compatriots from a parallel universe. There's even less reason to refuse. If this condition were to be made public, even if the higher-ups didn't agree, people would still be eager to board the ship. So, in the end, the approval didn't surprise Peng Hai. Chun let out a heavy sigh with the final result in hand. The decision-makers looked at Chun and exchanged glances. What is up? Why do you look like you're relieved we didn't make a mistake? Do we look that foolish? With such a big brother leading the way. We're definitely on board. We won't forget the hard years we've endured on this land. At the gathering, Chun raised his glass high in front of old Chun. Here, I toast you with tea instead of wine. Old Chun is the comrade who had been undercover on the covert front of that certain country, and he is also Chun's father, working in the intelligence agency. Old Chun knew that it was old Chun who first learned of his son's death. Chun old, I toast you as well. Old Chun's eyes were slightly red, but his expression remained unchanged. One cup of tea down, thinking of his son, felt heavier than 1,000 cups of wine. Holding up his glass, a look of sorrow appeared on his face. Old Chun didn't say much. This was his son's own choice, youthful ambition, sacrificing for the country, daringly infiltrating the enemy's territory. Now that he has sacrificed, it only leaves him feeling lost. Everything is over. Revenge? The entire Northern Alliance Space Force has already turned to dust. His son, if aware in the afterlife, would have found solace in that. Next, Old Chun should live well for his son and take a good look at this vast world. Perhaps leaving here for a new place to experience the brilliance of a new world is a good choice. Old Chun, I heard from Xiao Feng that your son wanted to build a bamboo pavilion by the creek after retirement. You must support him in completing that. Chun Lao and Old Chun have a good relationship. Both share the surname Chun, but they are not related. One is from the southwest, and the other is from the southeast. I will, Old Chun said, raising another cup of tea. He then asked, what about Xiao Feng? He liked to tinker with weapons. It's been quite a few years since he left, right? You should also experience it well for him. Ah, that rascal. Chun Lao waved his hand, and the sadness on his face lasted only a moment. His son had embarked on a research path, but he had an accident while developing high-energy weapons and had been gone for many years. Chun Lao had forgotten exactly how many years it had been. He deliberately chose not to think about it. He didn't want to expose his vulnerability to his subordinates and enemies. It's a great thing. Let us raise our glasses to Captain Pang. Yes, to Captain Pang. We can't wait to find a good place on the new Earth. It must have wind, water, and trees, and it would be best if we could fish. During the evening gathering, everyone was drinking tea and surprisingly appeared a bit tipsy. Perhaps the tension had finally eased. Several elders, no longer as composed as before, started to act a bit mischievous. In short, the atmosphere was exceptionally harmonious. However, on the other side, it was a different story. For ships hovering in the sky above the region had finally deployed robots after hovering for several hours. The robots were driving the fleeing humans out of the urban area, and no one dared to attack these machines, because any act of aggression would trigger a pale beam of light from the ships above. This light, upon contact with any living being, whether a dog or a human, could instantly vaporize them into a cloud of white mist. At the same time as they were being driven away, the robots were also transmitting orders to everyone. Thus, all humans, regardless of who they were herded to the central square. Subsequently, the robots captured a few individuals and sent them onto the ships. By the time they came down, they understood that these invaders wanted them to repair their ships, specifically near lightspeed vessels. According to the design plans they provided, they were to repair as much as they could. The entire region, relying on its original organizational structure, began to operate rapidly. A large number of people were forcefully sent into factories. With the robots temporarily insufficient, they demanded manual labor. Thus, 10 days later, under the coercion of the ship's power, order was restored to the region. However, this order was now solely focused on one purpose: building ships. On the ship Awakening of Ignorance, Chun Lao was invited to the biological laboratory at the rear of the ship. Chun Lao, we have seriously considered your suggestions regarding the future handling of this place. Peng Hai pointed at the busy biologists on board and smiled slightly. Oh, you can actually do this? Mr. Chun was somewhat astonished, his curious gaze directed towards the transparent glass. This is just a small matter. We have a friend from an extraterrestrial civilization who, in their spare time, once reconstructed the genes of dozens of dinosaur species. With a wave of his hand, a transparent incubation chamber appeared before them. Inside the chamber was a strange embryo that was slowly growing. Mr. Chin looked on with curiosity. The embryo resembled a chicken but had thicker beast-like legs, front claws that were unusually sharp, no beak, and sharp teeth. This is the embryo of a species known as the Majungasaurus, and it is currently being cultivated. When the time comes, we can simply release it. Extraterrestrial civilization friend. Mr. Chin's eyes widened. Images of fictional alien beings flashed through his mind, along with various depictions of extraterrestrials from science fiction works. At the same time, he was astonished. Peng Hai and his team were truly well connected, having friends from an extraterrestrial civilization. Moreover, this extraterrestrial force must be quite powerful to have casually reconstructed the genes of dozens of dinosaur species. This could easily lead to the creation of a Jurassic Park. Meanwhile, in a biological laboratory somewhere in this universe, Holos sneezed heavily. Achoo. Then, he felt a chill behind him, and he looked up cautiously. Who was just thinking about me? Dozens of species? Isn't that too few? I remember the database contains other prehistoric organisms as well. At that moment, the deputy captain, who had just stepped out of the experimental chamber, made a surprising remark. Excuse me, what should I call you? Mr. Chen's eyes lit up. Wow, I noticed you a long time ago. There are indeed talented people on this ship. Are we preparing for a prehistoric showdown? The two of them seemed to hit it off immediately. Chapter 321, The Park in the Avatar World. Near the space gate on Pandora, the base has rapidly expanded over the past 2 years of the expedition fleet's flight, now forming a fortress capable of accommodating thousands of people. Here, it has evidently become the largest biological research center in this universe. In the research laboratory, various native organisms of Pandora floated slowly in incubation chambers. In the center of the room was a complex root-like structure, densely entangled without any apparent order. A group of biologists was continuously extracting black minerals from these roots. The superconducting minerals have been completely cleared. How is the reaction? There is a reaction. The new structure allows these roots to maintain the same signal transmission efficiency even after the superconducting minerals have been extracted. Very good. The first phase of the experiment is complete. Among the scholars, Pan Wei's eyes were filled with excitement. The roots in front of them were not native to Pandora, but originated from Earth. However, after a series of genetic modifications, these Earth plants were able to achieve the same effects as Pandora's plants. Indeed, the goddess AI Hua can be replicated. Now, this universe has greater confidence to completely dominate AI Hua. This plan is codenamed parasitism. Through genetic manipulation of local plants on Pandora, gradual influence was exerted on AI Hua, allowing for a direct replacement if the contract was truly violated. Previously, the Biological Institute's preventive measures were aimed at eliminating AI Hua directly. But that would be too costly since this is a plant intelligence entity with significant research value. After much study, the biologists finally devised a major strategy: direct parasitic replacement. If the other party broke the contract, the plant genes hidden within Pandora's flora would be activated instantly, thereby covering and neutralizing AI Hua. In simple terms, it's like quietly installing a dual system on a computer. If the main system misbehaves, it can be deleted immediately. This way, the biologists could also study the new entity that emerges. The progress here is going well. Old Zhu exited monitoring mode, turned to Zhou Zhezhing, and smiled slightly. Peng Hai has sent word that they have taken over Earth and are now organizing the construction of the spacecraft. It won't be long before the personnel we need arrive. I'm looking forward to it. Zhou Zhezhing smiled faintly, flipped through the documents in his hand, raised an eyebrow, and said, but I'm more interested in the prehistoric era plan. If it's ruthless enough, after the major construction is completed, we can send them back to the prehistoric times. Haha, it seems we are going to have a batch of ruthless individuals here. Old Zhu did not object, merely chuckling and reflecting. But this is good. Comrades who have emerged from hardship often have more resolute goals. Our Project 237 requires individuals who are determined, decisive, and relentless. Indeed, Zhou Zhezhing nodded in agreement. This principle is quite simple. Perhaps there are individual differences, but environmental influence is much greater. Just like comparing this universe with the wandering Earth, which Group S mentality is more steadfast? Is it the universe that has been engaged in crushing wars? Or the wandering Earth that has experienced the solar crisis? There is no need for comparison at all. This is why Old Zhu places such importance on the personnel from the Avatar world. These individuals can be directly utilized. They will certainly be effective. Now that you mention it, I'm even more looking forward to it. Zhou Zhezhing looked up towards the direction of the solar system, smiled broadly, and after a while suddenly remembered something, quickly asking, by the way, what has Xiao Feng been up to lately? I haven't seen him in a long time. He has been traveling around with his family. It's been a long time since they've seen each other, so it's time to explore and enjoy. Old Zhu chuckled. After nearly a year-long break, Feng Jing naturally had to bring his family over to enjoy and appreciate the magnificent achievements he had created. Cough. This really suits Feng Jing's easygoing personality. Meanwhile, on Pandora, everyone was busy, and on Mars in the current universe, Feng Jing was leisurely strolling in the forest park with his mother, grandfather, and father. Mom, why don't you all move to Mars in the future? Supporting his grandfather, he spoke to his father and mother. That's fine. Your uncle and the others also got selected and came over, so there will be familiar faces. Feng Jing's father, Feng Qilian, took a deep breath, feeling the refreshing air. He adjusted slightly, not quite used to it, but overall nodded in satisfaction. All right, this place has good sunlight. Suitable for your grandfather's retirement. Feng Jing's mother, Huang Qingzhu, kept holding her son's hand, watching him grow increasingly resolute, no longer the innocent face she remembered, smiling and nodding repeatedly. I remember when you joined that plan, you were just a freshman, right? It's been several years now. Thinking of the years apart, her eyes couldn't help but mist over with tears as she affectionately regarded her son. You need to take care of yourself. It's been years since I last saw you and oh, my eyes are betraying me. Huang Qingzhu rubbed her eyes, and the tears flowed more freely as she spoke. However, the reserve characteristic of parents from their culture prevented her from saying the words she longed to express. I miss you. Instead, she gazed at her son, gently patting his hand. Seeing his wife in such a state made Feng Qilian uncomfortable. He spoke up in a tone that was both scolding and comforting, then gently wiped away her tears. Yet, the longing he felt for his son remained hidden behind the demeanor of a father, reflective of his military background. The family walked together through the forest park, crying and laughing. Above them, 5 suns shone warmly, creating a somewhat magical backdrop. After a long while, the group of 4 fell silent, simply moving forward. After some time, the elder, supported by Fang Jing, suddenly paused, turned to his grandson, and gently touched Fang Jing's cheek with his rough, bark-like hand. He then smiled broadly and said, "Jinger, well done. I've heard from your old squad leader about your achievements." With a grin, the elder gave Fang Jing a thumbs up and patted his shoulder heartily. Fang Qilian approached his father, hesitated for a moment, then gathered his resolve. Looking at his son, his gaze softened, no longer strict, and he nodded heavily, expressing approval that made Fang Jing's heart tremble. "Xiao Jing, you haven't embarrassed us. You are already a pride for both your grandfather and me." This last sentence carried an indescribable sense of relief and pride. However, upon hearing it, Fang Jing felt an uncontrollable tremor within him, whether from excitement or joy. "You are my pride." This was perhaps the most desired affirmation a son could wish to hear from his father, because when such words come from a father, it signifies that you have come of age. It is a recognition, a validation that a son longs for deeply. The meaning behind it is beyond words, approval, acknowledgement, and the subtle shift in the father-son relationship. At that moment, Fang Jing profoundly understood. He knew that when his father said those words, he had already passed the invisible role of the pillar of the family into his hands. From that moment on, he was no longer the carefree child under his father's protection. He gained his father's recognition and would bear the responsibilities of family and self. This change was actually very subtle, but Fang Jing felt it deeply, enough to make it unforgettable for the rest of his life. In chapter 322 of 100 Years of Solitude, it is said that parents are a wall between us and death. At this moment, Fang Jing had a deeper understanding of this statement. He accompanied his parents and the elder, exploring the surrounding areas of the Eternal Day City on Mars, constantly enjoying the scenery, seemingly trying to make up for the years he had missed, until he grew a bit tired of the fun. He received a communication summoning him from Zhu Lao, and after settling his family in the Eternal Day City, he returned to Node Island. Node Island. He hadn't seen it for a year. Fang Jing looked at the familiar lakes, filled with bustling scientists in white coats, and felt a sense of returning home. "Did you have fun with Uncle and Aunt?" Zhou Yuan, wearing engineering armor and dragging a large box, called out to Fang Jing. "Had a great time." Fang Jing nodded with a smile. This smile carried a bit of confidence and assurance. He had changed, becoming a little more composed than before. Not much, but indeed more stable. Zhou Yuan looked at Fang Jing's face, suddenly took off his armor, stroked his chin in contemplation, and after a long while came to a conclusion. "What?" Fang Jing pouted, and said, "Are you implying that I used to be too carefree? You were the same. That's different. I was just being carefree." Zhou Yuan raised an eyebrow, not specifically refuting Fang Jing, only grinning and advising. "It'll be convenient in the future. Uncle and Aunt are in the Eternal Day City. You can visit anytime during your breaks." After saying this, he turned and waved his hand. "You go to Zhu Lao first. I'll unload the cargo and come over." "Okay." Fang Jing watched Zhou Yuan's back, feeling a bit puzzled. Why did Zhou Degu seem different today, not as carefree as before? Behind him, Zhou Yuan, turning to leave, only smiled faintly. "Xiaofeng, the road of growth is long and arduous. Carefree and carefree are not the same. There's the carefree innocence of childhood, the seemingly indifferent carefree that masks worries, and the carefree that comes from having experienced and seen through everything. These are different." And Zhou Yuan naturally belonged to the latter. The last one. A hint of sadness flashed in his eyes as he recalled those days guarding the border, thought of his comrades who had sacrificed in front of him, and so much more. It's all Fang Jing's fault for reminding me of these. I'll get him back later." Fang Jing. "Wait, it's my fault. Don't come over." A quarter of an hour later, in the computing storage room, Zhu Lao sat in the main seat, surrounded by many computer scholars, including the engineer Zivis, who sat nearby. Fang Jing walked in, glancing at the large gathering, and quickly found a seat. Once everyone had arrived, Mr. Zhu finally spoke. "Fang Jing, the reason I brought you back this time is to let you try this thing." As he spoke, he pulled out a massive square object from under the table with one hand. This cube was about 2 meters in length, width, and height, and it looked quite heavy. Yet Mr. Zhu, who was not particularly strong, was able to lift it effortlessly with one hand. "Is this a range hood?" Fang Jing looked at the square block and couldn't help but speculate. To clarify, it wasn't that he was foolish. He simply didn't know that everyone present were computer scientists. The appearance of this block reminded him of a type of range hood. The computer scientist who was about to speak was caught off guard by Fang Jing's question. Almost losing his composure, he exclaimed, "What do you mean a range hood? Are you blind?" Mr. Zhu chuckled and explained, "No, this is not a range hood. This is the pinnacle of 2 years of work by these computer scientists." "Oh, this is a quantum computer." Fang Jing nodded, understanding. At the same time, he noticed the somewhat bloodshot eyes and messy hair of the previously hesitant scholar. No, it wasn't just one, but the entire group of scholars looked haggard, with bloodshot eyes and similarly unkempt hair. They clearly hadn't had much rest lately. What pinnacle work? More like a mad endeavor. Cough, cough. "Don't look at us like that. We're fine. We just forgot to take our adjuster after staying up late last night," said the scholar, feeling a bit comforted by Fang Jing's concerned expression. At least this brat still cared about them, the tech personnel. But the scholar who had spoken suddenly realized, with horror, how casually they mentioned the adjuster. It seemed they had become accustomed to taking it daily before pulling all-nighters. Damn. Cough, cough. All right, Fong Jing, give this computer a try. Mr. Zhu brought the topic back, saying helplessly, this is already the smallest we can make it. No matter what, let us try it out. Yes, yes. The main thing is to try it. Good. Fong Jing nodded and approached Mr. Zhu. Zhou Yuan followed closely behind, ready to catch Fong Jing if he suddenly fainted and fell to the ground. Taking a deep breath, Fong Jing reached out and touched the cube. It was cool. Smooth to the touch. That was Fong Jing's only experience with it. As for fainting, that was laughable. Wasn't he even sleepy? It seemed this wouldn't work. We must make it the size of a small suitcase and continue. The reaction from the crowd was one of disappointment. Indeed, trying to cut corners was not feasible. When they said it should be the size of a suitcase, it had to be exactly that. No larger. In that case, we can only keep going. The previously speaking computer scientist looked like the blood vessels in his eyes had become more pronounced, shifting from bright red to a deeper shade of crimson. Wait. Everyone should take a good rest for a few days first. Fong Jing quickly raised his hand to stop everyone. Oh, do we still need to keep working? You all should take a break first. Is biotechnology really just being used for supplements? Your health is important. Fong Jing was right about this. During the weekend, you all chose to work overtime, so now I can only issue a mandatory rest order. Old Zhu shook his head and stood by Fong Jing's side. These scholars do have holidays. They normally work 8 hours a day with weekends off. However, just because they are not allowed to work overtime doesn't mean they won't choose to do so on their own. These guys, although they complain about the taste of certain regulators and biotechnological supplements, are still chugging down the research like no one else. No way. The members of the computer team widened their eyes. There's no such thing as a mandatory rest order. We can still fight on. I don't need it. I have genes that resist fatigue, so I'm not worn out yet. Zaiwee's eyes flickered as he experienced the allure of various computer technologies in the multiverse. And he found it hard to stop. He is not human, and the physical capabilities of different species cannot be generalized. You should also take a good rest. Learn from Horus and go to Pandora to collect some samples when you have time. Old Zhu shot him a glare. He certainly didn't want any precious scientists to suddenly collapse.